And of course, tonight the conversation falls into the question of unemployment. Following the figures released yesterday, South Africa's unemployment rate now rose to a record high, 34.4% for the second quarter of 2021, making it one of the highest in the world. Tonight, we unpack how can we fix this growing crisis and why are companies not hiring. Joining me to talk about this is Tower Group CEO Kerry Morris, Black Business Council CEO Kganki Matabane, Professor Jannie Rossouw of Wits Business School, as well as the unemployed graduate who has direct experience of this situation, Kananelo Khoetsa, who is with us also on this conversation. You're a part of the conversation tonight, so you can WhatsApp your questions and comments to 072-110-5584, or you can tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for joining us tonight here on In Focus. It's good to have you.
Evening.
All right. Let's immediately get to it. As soon as I saw those numbers being released, the question that quickly popped to my mind, except of course the general answers that we would get around the structural reforms or the macroeconomic shocks that result in unemployment. The first thing, Kerry Morris, that I wanted to ask is, why are companies not employing?
I think that we are sitting with a bottom-heavy hierarchy. From a recruitment perspective, we have a larger population than the jobs that are crossing our desks every day. I'm not sure if companies have maybe combined 2 or 3 roles into one in a cost-saving exercise, but that's what we're seeing every day.
So is it just purely a case of there are just too many people that need employment than the vacancies that are available?
That is what we finding from a recruitment perspective, yes.
But what about those who are still having huge amounts of people that would possibly fill certain positions, but they are not hiring? Is it a question of a mismatch as far as the applications that are being sent through and the vacancies that are available?
I don't think it is a mismatch, but it's a mismatch from skill and education. We are lacking a lot of critical skill in South Africa, and the requisitions that we get from across our desk at Tower Group, we cannot find the skill to fill what the clients are requiring.
Kganki Matabane, is that what you're experiencing? I know we'll get into the general structural reforms. Needless to say, they play a particularly important role. But why are companies not hiring? For example, we heard of the financial sector that somewhat surprisingly did well in spite of the COVID-19. Most of those companies declared dividends and they paid their shareholders handsomely. And none of them are talking about hiring more people.
Evening, Tower and the viewers. The challenge that we're having as a country is that the economy is not growing. Actually, the economy is shrinking and we're losing jobs. So you can't just look at one sector, for example, of financial services, because the economy is, we don't have like a parallel economy for financial sector, a parallel one for another sector. If you look, for example, someone who works in tourism or hospitality, they get paid, and then that money circulates in the economy. It assists financial sector because they have to pay their bonds and then buy clothes there and then all those type of things. So if the economy is not growing and people are losing jobs, the economic activity in the country will reduce. And then the issue we're having now, we've been having for some time, because in any economy that is not growing, jobs won't be created, because you create jobs by the jobs are a result of an economic activity that's expanding. It forces companies to hire more people. At the moment, because of COVID, our downgrade and the latest looting, we have that challenge where people are saying, let's rather preserve the little that we have rather than expanding and hiring. I think for me, that is the challenge that we're facing as a country.
Yeah. Professor Rossouw, for completeness of this explanation, I'm sure there are other areas that need to be addressed. I'm sure at a macroeconomic level, certainly the question would be the economy, and we'll get into the fiscal policies, we'll get into the monetary policies and things that need to happen there. But are there other things here that are happening that maybe employers are not talking about, that they are facing, and that create a challenge for them from hiring graduates to get into the system?
Good evening, Tabo and fellow panelists, and good evening to our viewers. I want to take a step back, Tabo, by just pointing out that over the past decade, South Africa's economic growth rate was lower than the population growth rate. So we had this decade of chaos under the Zuma administration. We cannot call the Zuma administration a government of the country. It was a gang of robbers that tried to steal as much as they can. As a result of that, economic performance was at a very low level. Since December 2013, the country has been in a long economic slump. But despite all this, the population continued to grow at 1.5% per annum. If population growth exceeds economic growth, inevitably unemployment will grow. So as a first step, it's necessary to get economic growth on a sustainable level higher than the population growth rate. Once we have achieved that, we can talk about strategies to make inroads into existing unemployment. And that will imply things like a revision of labor legislation, which simply makes it unattractive to employ more people. It will imply that we need to relook something like broad-based black economic empowerment that has really become a way of enriching certain people in the economy at the expense of others who are then excluded. In my view, for instance, broad-based economic empowerment, broad-based black economic empowerment must be replaced with what I call BEST, black economic skills transfer, to ensure employability of people.
Right. Kananelo Khoetsa, she is an unemployed youth, but also part of the Youth Capital, which is a youth-led advocacy campaign to reduce youth unemployment. Kananelo, what do you say when you hear that employment could never be created unless we actually begin to grow this economy, which is something that is not going to happen tomorrow? It's something that will probably need to be happening at least in the next 5 years.
Okay. Good evening. Okay, when I hear that, one of the first things that comes to mind is that I would rather something was done now, that we start doing something right here and right now, as opposed to just, continue theorizing and actually, just thinking about thoughts and, just basically theorizing. I would rather we start finding solutions right now, right here. Because I understand that, yes, the economy does need to grow. That goes without debate, right? But again, we also have to understand: are we even preparing the coming generations for the upcoming economy? With the fourth industrial revolution coming up, are we preparing our learners in basic educations? Are we preparing our learners in tertiary? Are we actually even equipping them to actually even be productive and proactive in the upcoming economy? Because we cannot keep adopting old strategies to the present challenges that we currently have.
Yeah. And do you think young people have got the patience, as you speak to them at Youth Capital, to wait for these things, for those who are in power, the adults, to get their ducks in a row and fix the economy and see some growth?
I don't think they particularly have patience, because as things stand right now, whichever job you apply for, experience is required, right? And with the greater call for more young people to be employed, there are even now age restrictions to actually access some job opportunities. I know I for one have experienced a lot of those, where I would actually go try apply and then only to learn that I'm too old to even be applying for such posts. You understand? So it's not even just about patience. It's about all these many barriers that we have to go through to just access those very job opportunities that we really seek.
Let's talk about that when we continue next. How do we break down those barriers? Labor market activation measures for unemployed people in the country. Kerry Morris, Kganki Matabane, Kananelo Khoetsa, as well as Professor Jannie Rossouw. When we back with you now tonight here on In Focus on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405, and thanks for staying on with us. Kerry Morris, Kganki Matabane, Kananelo Khoetsa, as well as Professor Jannie Rossouw, discussing what is it that we need to do to activate employment in the country. So, Kganki, let me come to you. I mean, 2008, 2009, during that huge recession, a country like Sweden, the economy was also growing, not growing. If you're saying it's a recession, it means the country is also not seeing growth. But there's something that they did as far as unemployment is concerned to turn things around, particularly adjusting their vocational training courses to the labor market demand in terms of skills. The schools, are they playing their role here? And are we interrogating that enough? And are they close enough to the labor market to know exactly what is in demand and the type of training that we're giving to young people?
Yeah, Tawa, I think maybe before I respond to your question, let me just correct the misconception by Prof. By blaming BEE is not true. The current triple BEE, that's why it's called broad-based Black economic empowerment. We've got skills there as a focus. We've got the enterprise development, we've got the management control, we've got ownership and then procurement. So it's not true that BEE is not broad-based, unless Prof is trying to say Black people must not be owners of the economy. They must just be employees like it happened during apartheid. But that's not my question. That's not my issue. I just wanted to address it so that we don't leave it hanging. I think that the difference between our economy and other economies is that if you look at our economy is a highly concentrated economy. You can look at all the sectors. The sectors are dominated by what is called the big two or the big three or the big four. And then if you look at them, for example, telecoms, there are two companies that own and controls close to 90% of the market. So if those companies are not employing, it means the entire ICT industry is not employing anyone. You look at the financial services, we have the big five, or you look at mining, you look at all the sectors of the economy. But if you look at other countries, they've got a huge percentage of the economy falling under what we call small business. Because small businesses, when they get more opportunities, it's easier for them to employ people, because not that they want to employ people, but they are forced by the responsibility that they've been given. Yeah. So we need to come to a situation in South Africa where at least the big four, the big five, and the others, even if they own 60% of the economy, at least then it gives all of us the space to compete in the 40% of the space. But at the moment, we're only left with 10% of the space.
So that's precisely what part of what they did, deregularize certain sectors of the economy, right? Which, for example, if you look at South Africa, the energy sector is predominantly owned by the state. If you look, for example, at the transport sector, predominantly owned by the state. But create more competition, and creating more competition would result in, as you're saying, more small business players coming into the space and creating more jobs.
Yeah. I think you've got a point, but I think, remember, we've got a history where we come from, and that history, if you privatize everything, including public goods, the poor will never be able to afford anything. Imagine if Eskom was a private company, they'll never connect my village in Makurung in Limpopo, because it just won't make sense financially. And we see it with, for example, if you are in my village, to get a signal, we must climb a mountain or a tree, because the private sector just doesn't want to invest where they don't see any return on investment. So we need to balance the two. We need to have the state owning certain things so that my grandmother can be able to access a hospital. My niece can access school, because if you privatize everything else, then people won't afford it. But my issue is that we need to support small business, mainly by funding businesses. At the moment, it's very, very difficult to access funding in South Africa through either the private businesses, financial institutions, and even state-owned. Yeah. Because everyone is risk averse. Right. For me, if we instead of trying to create a state that is dependent on handouts by giving people 350 rand, if you can take that 350 rand equivalent and capitalize institutions like the Land Bank, the NEF, so that we can fund small businesses and black businesses, and then create economic activity, and then we can then create sustainable jobs rather than giving people handouts.
Kerry, let's talk about that very same question, labor market activation measures for unemployed people and the deregularization of certain sectors, or creating more competition, and whether or not that could possibly not be the answer to activating more employment.
I think it could be part of the answer to activating it, but I think a very small percentage. From my side, I think we are looking at a situation where what we were discussing earlier is going back to schooling. It is career guidance, and it is linking the loop between after school and learnerships, or studying straight after that. That is where we are seeing the biggest gap in the labor industry.
And is the private sector putting their money where their mouth is? In other words, investing in educational programs or vocational training courses that speaks to the skills that they require?
Yes and no. I'm a big fan of BBEE, Tower Group's Level 1, and I do see the value when big businesses and private businesses put their money where their mouth is. But no, people sadly aren't doing that in the market. They are very risk averse, and they are not wanting to part with their finances in order to upskill and put learnerships on the table.
Yeah. And is there something that we are doing particularly wrong in public schools when it comes to our schooling system, or, for example, special subjects, right, for the kind of skills that we need? And I read somewhere that, for example, certain schools in Europe would not let those who just finish their matric to wander for 2 years. They stay in touch with them, advise them, give them guidance on job opportunities that are available and educational opportunities that they should be pursuing. It seems in South Africa they get through the formal schooling process and we say, oh well, go see yourself.
And that is exactly where the big problem comes in. Once you've stopped schooling, to go take a gap year or take 2 years off to go back and study is almost impossible. You're not in that way of life anymore. So I think that's a great idea, and that goes back to what I said earlier about career guidance. I think that schooling pupils need better education on what to do after school.
Prof, the role that schools need to be playing here as far as ensuring that young people are given the guidance and the advice that they need for the labor market. Kananelo saying she's not even sure whether we are training young people for the job market, for the labor market that they're going to be faced with in the future.
Yeah, schools have a very important role to play. But just before I expand, let me just go back to the earlier remark about black economic skills transfer. It's for the very reason that I want to see black people owning businesses that I argue for black economic skills transfer. Because black people have to have the necessary skills through skills transfer to be able to be successful business owners and to be successful managers of these businesses. If you don't have the necessary skills, the prerequisite skills, we are setting people up for failure. And we cannot afford failure with an unemployment crisis as we have in South Africa. That is also part of the schooling system. And in order to get a bridge from the schooling system to employment, what we will have to allow is more flexible short-term employment contracts. Currently, we have too much restriction, too much regulation in terms of short-term employment contracts, because short-term employment contracts enable young people to gain skills in the labor market, to show that they are able to do jobs, and to help them to build CVs that they can use that will stand them in good stead to find permanent employment. It's often been said that the biggest challenge in life is to find your first place of employment, to get your first foot on that ladder. And to do that, we need more flexibility in terms of employment of young people to allow them the opportunity to get into the labor market. And the school system can help bridging that gap.
Kganki Matabane, temporary employment or apprenticeship said to be one of the ways that you keep the unemployed in contact with the labor market. Would you support that kind of view?
Yeah, I think maybe going back to what Kerry was saying, if there was a will to actually implement learnerships properly, but unfortunately, most of the companies, especially in private sector, they are doing what you call tick boxing. To say, let's bring 10 young people this year. We get our B points. Next year we check them out. They're on the street, and we get another 10 our points. We get 10 people the following year. Hence, this thing is not working because you find a lot of people who are on learnerships, they do what we call learnership hopping. They're on learnership A this year, next year they're on another learnership. So they're not necessarily even learning anything because they'll be on sector A, the next year they are in a different sector. And if you look at the quality of actually what they do, they are busy making copies all the time because it's about ticking the boxes, not implementing the spirit of skills development. So I think we need to find a way of changing the mindset to actually get those people who are in learnerships, give them quality learnerships, but also absorb them into these companies, because what's the use of one in 5 years being in 5 companies doing learnership? But
whose mindset, Kganki, needs to be changed?
Yeah, it's the mindset of the business leaders, because if a business leader, as a CEO, set the tone that these are the things that needs to be done, it will happen, and maybe from the board they must set up proper performance management system that includes skills development, because in private sector, whatever gets measured gets done.
All right.
But if it's not there,
I'll come back to that point. I need to take a break. I'll come back and push a little bit further on that. Kerry Morris, Kganki Matabane, Kananelo Khoetsa, as well as Professor Jannie Rossouw. Let's get back with us on In Focus tonight as we continue to look and interrogate labor market activation measures that would get the unemployed working in the country. Kerry Morris, Kganki Matabane, and Kananelo Khoetsa, Professor Jannie Rossouw with us tonight. We're not going to take your views in a moment, which you're sending through on WhatsApp as well as on Twitter. So, Kganki, before the break, you were saying the leadership of these businesses should take these learnerships seriously. Do you think subsidized employment is one of the areas that could get them to take this seriously? For example, if you subsidize entrepreneurs or small businesses that commit to hiring those who've been out of school and have not been employed for a long time?
Yes, I think subsidizing small businesses may work, but subsidizing big business has not worked, because you remember there was a youth employment service that promised millions and millions of jobs, and it failed. It failed dismally, mainly because, again, the big businesses wanted to get BE points instead of implementing the spirit of the act. So if you subsidize small businesses, it may work, but you also firstly have to look at what are the challenges of small businesses. The challenge of the challenges that small businesses have is access to funding and access to market. Because there's no point in having a small business sitting there without market. If you are in retail, for example, you need to get the big retailers to give you space in their shops, and you need to get funding, and the funding that you need is supposed to be a risk tolerant type of funding, which, as we speak in South Africa, we don't have.
What is risk tolerant type of funding? Is it a grant?
Not necessarily a grant. You need what they call blended finance, for example, where you get a percentage of a fund of a grant, and the other percentage is loan, but with very, very favorable interest rates.
Yeah. As an economist that suggested that, was into the conversation to say, since the 200 billion, I think, or so that was to be given to the small business, only 11 billion or something ridiculously small of that was actually distributed. It's maybe time for government to consider giving that as a grant, because people have been really hard hit by the COVID situation, and they're not about to take a loan at this particular point. And particularly small businesses would need that kind of support, and government would need to commit in that investment.
That one time didn't work because it was not meant for what it was supposed to do, because it was a normal loan, and when you are in a lockdown with zero turnover, the last thing you need is a loan, because how are you going to pay for that loan without any income coming in? So those who devised that loan guarantee scheme, they didn't think about those things. And then the criteria was also very, very stringent. For example, one of the criteria was that the business must be in good standing with the banks. So but if you already missed one payment because of the lockdown, you can't qualify automatically. So that is not the type of funding that is required. We need a funding that will tolerate if someone misses 6 months, but at least it's got the prospect of coming back when they do big things. For example, if I give you an example, a lot of people were given mineral rights during President Mbeki's time, and again, because there's no risk-tolerant funding in South Africa, these mines ended up being owned by Australians, Canadians, because they've got the funding specifically for exploration. Because exploration is high risk, you may get a huge wealth underneath or get zero. If you get zero, write it off. So South Africa, we don't have that type of funding that tolerates risks. To say, if you want to enable innovation, for example, in the country, you need to be able to say, I've put 10 billion rands for funding innovation. If I lose it, I lose it. If I don't lose it, I'm likely to make 100 billion. Instead of giving people the 350 that is going, it won't come back anyway, because it's for consumption. It's not for stimulating the economy by investing in the economy.
Risk-tolerant funding. I'll get reaction in a moment from Professor Jannie Rossouw. Kerry Morris as well. I saw you nodding about the failures of the YES program. But Kananelo, you're listening to this conversation. I'd like to bring you in and also get your views. Do young people take the learnerships seriously, or are those providing those learnerships taking young people seriously in those learnerships? What's your view?
Okay, I think young people are taking learnerships seriously. I do believe they're taking them seriously, but I think, like the previous speakers have spoken, that this is experience that should matter and that should count. But in my experience, I've actually even encountered instances where you will see a job application specifically saying that they want formal employment, meaning they don't count learnerships. And again, like it was also said that you find, because of the lack of opportunities that are present, you'll find young people hopping and jumping between learnerships. And now that is also being narrowed down, which means that now it's Kananelo, I'm literally part of the niche group, right? I'm not in education, employment, or even training. I'm not upskilling myself because now the opportunities to even access such learnerships has been narrowed down. And again, I cannot even use some of the experiences that I've attained from said learnerships to actually even grow and even enter the formal sector, because they want specifically formal employment. They want you to have worked in an office setting specifically. Thank you.
And I mean, that's really a conundrum, Kerry, is it not? So you're saying young people get into the learnerships, but then you're saying again, well, we're not going to recognize those learnerships, which comes to the point that Kganki is raising, and I saw you nodding, that some of these things are just box-ticking exercises.
They are indeed, and it is a problem. I think, again, like we said earlier, learnerships are not being run in the correct way. I mean, the Yes initiative I thought was great and it didn't work, but I believe that it wasn't being rolled out correctly from business. Learnerships, unfortunately, don't get recognized as work experience. And to go back to what Prof said earlier, if we had the leeway, I mean, we have a very big temporary staffing division at Tower Group, and we are very, very restricted by the labor laws now with temporary contracts. And it's a great way for young people to have experience, do a month here, a month there. You don't know when you're out of school what you want to do. So with the labor laws now, we're very restricted on temporary contracts.
Prof, let's talk about the risk-tolerant funding, or maybe just broadly talk about subsidized employment and targeting particularly small businesses. Forget about the big guys. Try and subsidize the smaller guys and put there as a proviso that you must hire those who have not been in employment for a long time, and don't have an expectation to have this money being repaid to you in 2 or 3 months, but give them a little bit of leeway.
Well, if you talk subsidized employment, inevitably you talk about government subsidies. And unfortunately, as I've said, owing to the mismanagement under the years of the Zuma administration, the South African government has literally run out of money. We are facing the precipice of a fiscal cliff. So, unfortunately, the government does not have the capacity to afford more subsidies at the moment, especially within an environment where civil servants are demanding even higher wages than what they currently earn. As it is at the moment, civil service wages probably exceed 50% of the government's total revenue. So the civil service revenue bill is completely out of control, and as a result, the government has literally run out of money. The government has no more money to spend, for instance, on things like wage subsidies for young people or the likes. If the economy had been growing under the Zuma administration at 3 or 4% per annum, as it did under the latter years of the Mbeki administration, the fiscal position would have been completely different. But during the last decade, the focus of the government was state capture, looting, and corruption. And as a result of that, we are in a very serious fiscal difficulty. With low economic growth, the government simply does not have the money to do all these things.
With that lack of movement as far as the fiscal situation is concerned, is there something we can do policy-wise, also as far as the monetary policy is concerned? Do we need a new framework for the monetary policy instead of inflation targeting?
No, we don't need a new framework. Inflation targeting ensures low inflation. In South Africa, our inflation rate is around 4.5%, which is a tolerable inflation rate. In my view, the inflation rate should be zero, or as close to zero as possible. We often forget that in the bad 1980s of the previous century, this country's inflation rate was close to 15% annum. If there's something that really hits poor people very hard, it is high inflation. So we cannot go back to high inflation, because high inflation does not stimulate economic growth. Low inflation creates a room for economic growth, but then you need responsible government. And unfortunately, as I've now said repeatedly, the Zuma administration was clearly irresponsible and not suitable to govern a country, and we will pay a high price for this. We are paying a high price for the Zuma madness we had, and we will pay a high price for this probably for the next 5 years to repair the damage done during the decade of Mr. Zuma's
Is this administration doing any better?
Well, this administration is trying at least. We see a Zondo commission and we see other attempts to bring people to book. But what we desperately, seriously need in this country is a complete revision of our labor legislation, our employment legislation. The current structure of legislation does not bring us new employment. It simply protects people in employment. And remember, trade unions only protect those with employment. Trade unions do not take responsibility for the unemployed. So the labor legislation that we have in South Africa at the moment simply doesn't work. We need to get rid of it. We need to rethink it to make it possible to employ people.
Productivity enhancing labor market policies. We'll discuss that when we come back in a moment. Kerry Morris, Kganki Matabane, Kananelo Khoetsa, as well as Professor Jannie Rossouw. We're back with you on In Focus tonight. Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. Kerry Morris, Kganki Matabane, and Kananelo Khoetsa. Professor Jannie Rossouw with us tonight. Quickly look at some of the messages that have come through before we wrap up this conversation on WhatsApp 072-110-5584. This is a view from Pinda in the VAR saying the private sector has given up on creating job opportunities. Instead, they are cutting costs and retrenching all the time. Where are the investors that promised to create more job opportunities? What is, or was it just a PR exercise for President Cyril Ramaphosa? Kganki Matabane, you might be a little bit closer to that process. We saw 2 investment summits in the country. Where are those investors? What happened to the money that they were going to pump into the country, create job opportunities, build some infrastructure, and so on and so forth?
Remember, those were pledges. You know, when you pledge, you just say, this is my intention. And the intention can only be realized if certain things happen. And at the moment, for me, I think we need to try and focus. We're in a crisis. And when you're in a crisis, you should not behave as if things are normal. We should focus on things that will stimulate the economic growth. For example, each and every State of the Nation address we hear that South Africa will focus on infrastructure development. It will focus on making sure that South Africa becomes the construction side of Africa. But nothing much happens. So we've got an implementation problem as a country from a government point of view. We have a lot of municipalities in the rural areas. There's no water, there are no roads, there's nothing. But money gets returned every year because some of the municipalities don't appoint well-qualified and suitably qualified people who can actually do the work. So it's important that every year when we make the plans, there's a mechanism of judging whether those plans are working and then report back on implementation. Because if we become talkers like we've been, we're not going to solve any problem. Someone was saying, if South Africa, if they were the worst in the world, Olympic Games for plans, probably South Africa would have won gold, because we've just have since 1994 we've been having so many plans, economic plans and economic policies, but I suspect there hasn't been much implementation of those plans, and if you don't implement those plans, can never be useful because they just gathering dust in people's.
I wonder who's going to be bold enough, Kganki, to go back and say, let's go back to maybe the original plan or even the NDP. because we are on some other plan now, which I'm not sure what it is. But let's go back to that. That was a good plan. Can we just do the fundamentals that were in that plan that are supposed to be done? But you're also the voice of black business, particularly smaller business as well, as you sit here. And we've been back and forth in the conversation, touching on the question of the labor market policies. I didn't bring labor onto this conversation deliberately because I wanted to speak to people who are hiring people to understand why exactly you're not hiring, because labor will tell us why you're not hiring, certainly, and we'll bring them on at a later stage. But there is this sense that says that union density, for example, in South Africa, the coverage of the collective agreements hampers productivity. Do black business owners feel exactly that way?
Yeah, remember what probably gives labor unions anxiety is because of the past, where some people abused the labor legislation, and I think maybe government, because some of the ministers come from labor unions, they will then also be uncomfortable when we talk about labor reforms. What is needed is a balance. It's a balance that will make sure that people don't abuse the labor system, where, for example, when you say a temporary employment, they then convert everyone else to temporary employment, so that they can derive some benefits, either tax benefits or benefits where they dodge provident fund contributions and other things. So we need to balance that with the flexibility to absorb a new employees without the risk of being forced to keep them forever in case they don't perform. So there must be that flexibility that says, if you bring someone, the person is not fit or doesn't fit into the organization, there must be that flexibility that you can exit them from the organization without the process dragging for years, because your job is to run the company and to make money for the company, not to be spending all your time at the CCMA and other labor related institutions. So what we need as a country, we need that balance to make sure that the labor laws are not abused from both sides.
Yeah. How do we strike that balance, Professor Rossouw? I mean, we currently have a centralized framework type agreement where if it's agreed at one bargaining council, it applies across the board. How do you strike a balance and still be able to get a little bit of flexibility into the process?
Well, in striking a balance, we might have to agree that there must be say, for instance, a revenue threshold above which people cannot go to the CCMA. So the CCMA focus on precarious workers, but at the moment we have situations where chief executives of companies want to go to the CCMA when they've been dismissed for whatever reason. So, as I've said, it's rethinking the structure of labor legislation. And I want to make one other point. I strongly feel that what South Africa needs at the moment is a government of national healing. The country is in trouble, the country is ill, we need to heal our country. And to heal our country, we need to restore trust between government and the people, between labor and business, at all these levels. And to restore such trust, a government of national healing will inevitably have to be a government of national unity. Only that will restore trust in South Africa. Only then can we start addressing these major challenges that we face, including major unemployment challenge.
Yeah. When we say we are already seeing some kind of coalition governments happening, particularly at local government level, are they in any way helping to restore that trust?
South Africa does not have a long experience in coalition government, and we will have to gain more skills in that. But yes, these governments at local, at municipal level can help to achieve this. And then, of course, if we have a major unemployment problem in an upcoming municipal election, voters of this country should give a strong signal to the government that has led us into the situation that they are no longer happy with the government by not voting for the ANC government. That is the power in the hands of the unemployed and of the people in South Africa. Vote for another party if you believe that party can bring better economic outcomes.
Kerry, let's talk about what we can do immediately. I mean, as you heard Kananelo saying, they're not listening to you guys theorizing. They want action and action tomorrow. What can we do to get unemployed young people in contact with the labor market as yesterday? Kerry?
Hi, sorry, I lost you.
All right. Halfway through. I'm saying, what can we do immediately without theorizing and projecting too far to get young people who are unemployed right now in contact with employment?
I don't know what an immediate action is. I think, again, like we spoke about in the very beginning, it's a mindset of business, but it's also a mindset of the young people. And a lot of young people that we come across in business also don't want to do the hard yards. They would also like to walk into a nice job. So again, it goes back to closing the skills gap. I don't know what an immediate action would be to close that.
Kananelo, what do you think would be the immediate action to deal with this situation? For example, some of the issues that are being raised are occupational stereotypes, right? That certain people don't want to take up certain traditional jobs, which probably are seen as being done by males and not done by females. Have we got to a stage where those occupational stereotypes have been broken?
I think to a certain extent they have been broken. I don't know. I don't know, but I think so. I think a lot of ground is being broken. Let me start there. I do think a lot of ground is being broken, especially by people who have previously been, limited from accessing certain opportunities. People are actualizing themselves. I think that is what is happening. Of course, there are still barriers towards accessing such opportunities, because now it is no longer about your accessing such opportunities. It is about people's trust in you, right? Say women in STEM, people might not trust that, you can handle certain things, right? I think that is just maybe something that we are still working towards. I don't know. But, okay, as to what can be done immediately, I think more and more young people should be included in such conversations, right? Because I think to a certain extent, a generic approach has been also adopted. And I don't think that Nakele Kananelo from Kwakwa and experiencing the very same challenges as an unemployed youth from say Johannesburg, because infrastructure-wise, right? But I think such things need to be taken into consideration, right? And seeing what exactly needs to be done, what needs to be developed right now to actually even bring more young people into employment opportunities. But beyond that, I don't think that the answer simply lies in creating more job opportunities, but rather because as young people, we have different ambitions and aspirations in life. And like it has already been said, that there are people who are more interested in entrepreneurship and self-employment. Yeah. But now, are we even giving them the time of day? Are we even giving them the resources and opportunities that they need to even actualize themselves and even develop their businesses? I mean, we know that, say, like again, we barely have any incubation programs. Right. Whereas places
absolutely. Kananelo, I appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and thank you very much for raising such important issues very sharply with us here tonight. Kerry Morris, Kganki Matabane, and Professor Jannie Rossouw, I appreciate you as well, and thank you for coming on.